Can people see me right now? Cool. I'll just wait a few minutes just for people to trickle in. So I guess before we start, does anyone have any kind of questions beforehand? I could kind of answer a few of them right now. What is the slides be available at later? It would be. I could just throw it into general chat. And what am I drinking? I am drinking a mango pomelo yogurt. The not sponsored. Got it from a place called Shui. They have some pretty good yogurt drinks. Yeah, so let's take a look at the poll. So it seems like, okay, most people don't really know what React is. Well, everyone. I would just be fair to say, okay, everyone doesn't really know what React is. You guys haven't really gone to know it very formally, and it's a kind of a even split of people who kind of also don't know JS and has a little bit of experience. So luckily, well, this workshop is shouldn't be very JS heavy, and yeah, and it's perfect that it seems like most people don't really know React because the content of this workshop is very much like very, very basic. So we'll cover a little bit about what it is. We'll talk a little bit about how it kind of works at a very high level, and then I'll talk a little bit about how component and state and props work. So those are things that I would deem as being like the three main things to really know. And then we'll go into kind of a little code demo. So we'll make a little component, we'll play around with some hooks, and we should be good to go from there. So let's see. Yeah, we'll just wait one more minute. Transcript on this. Right, times 5. Let's start. So, hello. If you guys have not known by now, or maybe you don't know because I'm using the dev account, my name's Frederick. I'm one of the developers here at Hack the Valley, and today I will be showing you guys React. So, giving you a quick little introduction. So, what is React? So, React is a JS library, which if you don't know, there is JS libraries and JS frameworks. Angular is a JS framework, but React is not. And the key difference between library and framework is React basically it mostly takes care of just rendering. That's all it really does. So if you want to do a little bit more, like, you want to do some routing, or, you want to do some API fetches, like it doesn't really do anything. It has like certain tools and things that are specific to React that you should be doing, but it doesn't actually enforce it, which is the key. It doesn't enforce it, and it doesn't actually say this is the way to do it, this is the only way. Compared to Angular, it has a CLI. You want to make a component, use a CLI. You want to, make a API request, do it this way, or it's sacrilegious. So React is a JS library, and hopefully by now you will know it's made by Facebook. It's made like in I think like the early 2000s. And it was made back in the day to provide a declarative way to render UI and logic in a reusable way. That dude. So that dude is called Dan Apro. You probably what's his last name? Dan Abramoff. So yeah, this is basically kind of like the guy, like the figurehead of React at the moment. So he's one of the main maintainers for React. So yeah, back to the point. React's created to provide a declarative way to render UI. So the word declarative means it basically gives you a bunch of tools to render UI. You don't have to actually care about how the tool works, right? All you need to do is know that this is a tool and this is how you use it. And if you use it like this, you will get this result. So that's what declarative means. It's almost like abstraction, and it's basically here it is, does this, don't worry about it, it just works. TM. And here I mentioned render UI and logic. And UI and logic meaning is for the component itself. So components are not just UI, because well, when you render a component, you might think, oh yeah, I'm doing front end UI, right? But there's also a bit of logic to these components, right? You could have props, you can have states, you can have effects, and which I will go a little bit more into. But these things that basically is stored within the component, like you click a button, it tells you, okay, you've clicked me 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. That is logic. So because of that, not only does it provide a way to render UI, there's also that logic piece, and of course in a reusable way. So components. I'm just gonna blow my nose for a sec. So do we have any questions so far, or are we good to move on? I'll take silence as no questions. You guys are free to just throw in chat and I'll answer it as I see them. So the next part is basically the biggest question, which is how does React work? So at a very high level, so I guess before I start, let's talk about what do we have on the right side. So on the right side, what we see right now is the Hack the Valley website. And then underneath, we basically have like a DOM. So it's kind of like a tree, well, a virtual DOM. So that it's like a tree that represents like all of the pieces in a website. So since most of us are not very familiar with JS, and I'll assume not very familiar with DOM, so the idea is a whole entire website in JavaScript could be represented, or just in general, can be represented, as a tree, right? You have like your HTML tag, and from there you have your head tag, your head tag, your body tag. So you branch out like that. Inside of your head, you have like multiple children, right? You can have your title, your rel, your metadata. In your body, you can have like your divs, your HTML, and whatever. And within the divs, you might have more things like more paragraphs and so on and so forth. So all of that, imagine that's just like a tree. So when we start off, like React renders the UI. So okay, it renders it. We see the site right now, and it remembers basically this UI. So it remembers the state and the structure of it, and they store that in memory. We call that the virtual DOM. So you might be thinking, okay, why does it need to store it in memory? Because there is already the DOM. So I'll get to that a little bit in a sec. And I guess to explain a little bit more about the virtual DOM is basically just a lightweight representation of it. So it's just slimmed down because a website could have like thousands of elements. So if you try to store all of that, that's a lot of work. So they slim it down so that they can actually store it and not force you to download more RAM because of how much information they have stored. So at some point, your website's doing its thing. Someone presses like a button, okay, and because you press a button, let's say something pops up and says like, oh, a button has been pressed. So something changed because of some kind of action. So if you see here, okay, within component one, something has changed. So it triggers a reload, like a re-render. So you can see here with a green, right? Like the thing suddenly green. So what React does is essentially takes this virtual DOM and realizes where it's changed, and then kind of change, and then from there it rebuilds the whole entire tree. So you get like a new tree. So you have a tree from before, and then when somebody's clicked, React from kind of top to bottom rebuilds the whole thing as a virtual tree. And the DOM itself hasn't changed, so we don't see anything yet. It's just behind the scenes, basically. React has remade what they think the website will look like. So we have two things to compare. So got the two trees. React performs something called reconciliation, which is a fancy term of just tree diffing. So React takes the two trees, look at it, and go like, okay, what's different about it? What has changed? And they say, okay, they realize this has changed. Once they figure out what has changed, they then figure out, okay, so all these nodes have changed in the tree. What's the most efficient way to kind of make these changes happen on the website itself? Okay. Because the thing about JavaScript is doing changes on the DOM is actually very, very expensive. So this is why React has this virtual DOM, right? It creates lightweight representations so that it's essentially like rebuilding the page with like a much less significant cost, and then doing all of the heavy lifting and figuring out what's wrong so that they can figure out how to do the actual heavy work of modifying the website in a very simple and efficient way. And as you can see here, it does the change and it's put in our Doge boy. It's through the power of React. It's through the power of technology. So hopefully, that's given everyone a good idea of, I guess, like at a high level, how React and most of these kind of frameworks work. They might not have a virtual DOM. They have their own way of keeping track of changes, but at the end of the day, they're figuring out what has changed and they're trying to efficiently replace it. I think that Dan is on our side. I think the Doge is a good addition to the website. So, is there any questions so far about what we've gone over with how the whole kind of rendering and diffing of React? Yeah, it's all rendered locally, so it's all client side, all done in your browser. Just move on for now. And more questions, don't worry about it. If you type in your question right now and I just move through, just enter it and I'll answer it. Okay, so now that we have like a rough idea, let's talk a little bit more about React itself, like as code. So right now, it's not a picture. I actually went and typed this out like by hand and did all the formatting. But here we have what a simple React component looks like. In fact, it's not a very special one. It's pretty stock. I think almost every React tutorial has this component. But let's kind of break it down and talk about the pieces. So, like I mentioned before, a component encapsulates UI and logic. And these things are encapsulated into something called a component, which for the longest time until like a few years ago was arguably the smallest building block in in React, or well, in any kind of framework in general. Now, not so much. At least for React, we have things called hooks. So that's basically now it's not components. The UI and the logic is actually separated to an extent. But that that's like going into like talking about atoms and chords. So these components, they're reused. So you can make a component, you can stick in another component, you can stick in another component multiple times, and by doing so, you get a new thing. But having just carbon copies of these things is not very useful, right? Because let's say I had a list of people I want to show. That doesn't make sense for me to make a component, and the only thing I can do is make a component for a person that is John Doe, right? I want to be able to be person 1, person 2, person 3. So these components could be modified. So we can stick in some information as it renders, like before it renders, and these things will basically change its behavior. So one way I can kind of describe it is it's almost kind of like parameters in a function, in a pure function, which if you don't know what a pure function is, it's a function where given the same input, you get the exact same output every single time. So yeah, it's a 1-to-1. The props are just like parameters in a function. You pass it in, and then the component, and then you render component, so it spits you out a component, and it's gonna be the same every single time you give the same prompt to an extent. And then the other thing is, when we click it, mess around with this component, it could also change. And that's not part of what we tell it initially, right? It's kind of like, if I kind of, punch someone, it's gonna go bruise, right? There's some kind of like change internally. And that stuff is kind of kept track of with state. So one analogy I like to use for these things, which nowadays is less of an analogy and more of it is actually what it is that a component, you can think of a component as a function, right? You have your big program, the program is their application, and you have a function that, encapsulates, a specific, like, bit of work. Components function, and in fact, in React, it is a literal function. When React needs to re-render a component, it literally runs your function, and that function gives it a component. And within this function, you could, this function you could pass in parameters, right? If I have a function that returns me, the full name of someone given this first and last name, the props is first, last name, full name. And of course, you have state, which are things that change kind of internally. So those, it's a little bit harder to explain, but it's kind of like local variables, but it's connected to like some kind of context above. So I don't know, maybe there's a singleton. So is everyone clear about components, props, state? Might wait a little bit longer for some people to respond because this is a pretty critical point in our little workshop. Yep, that's a component, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just want to make sure we have the three things kind of taken care of. Okay, fair enough. Then let's okay, sure. In that case, let's kind of get started on talking about the thing on the right. And you can see my cursor, right? Cursor? Can you see it? See me moving around? Okay, cool. So right here, on our import, we have our import use state. So that's one of the most commonly and probably something you'll see a lot. And what it does is it turns our pure component into something not so pure. So it essentially just lets us keep track of things within the life cycle of this component. And then right here, we define our component. So right here is a function. Like I said, not an analogy. It is a literal function. And, we name a component. It has to be uppercase. Oh, actually, before I talk about that, you might have noticed that for my import, I didn't put the big uppercase React. Like I didn't import the uppercase React from React, which some of you guys might still see in a lot of tutorials. And the reason why is because React 17 has gotten rid of that because their JavaScript transpiler plugin, which is called Babel, if you're curious, like the Babel plugin injects that in for them, so you don't need that anymore. Well, you might need it depending on what you use, but for the most part, no. So create a component. Here we are using our state. So in the state, it returns an array with two things. First thing is the actual value. Second thing is a function for you to use to change whatever the value is. And then whatever you pass into the use state is the starting value. And this could be empty, and you'll get undefined. And in this function, we will return the actual UI that we want to render. So you might look at this and think, okay, hey, Fred, this is some pretty cool HTML. But this is actually not HTML. This is something called JSX. And what JSX is basically syntactical sugar, which, if you don't know the term, is just fancy code that's not real. And talking about the whole Babel thing, it basically takes all of this and rewrites it into what it actually is in JavaScript, which would be React.create element div, and then an empty object because there's no props, and then a third parameter in the function will just be an array where the first one is create React element p, empty object, and then this as a string, and you get the idea. Oh, whoops. It's constant because it doesn't change when this renders. So set count is a function, so hopefully that should be clear why it's constant, because you don't actually replace a function, you just use the function. And for count, yes, you're right, count does change, but it doesn't change when this function is being run. So when you change state, essentially what happens is React will call this function again, and then this use state will realize that it has changed and then give it the new value rather than the old value. So it is constant, and it does change because it only changes when this is re-rendered, so rerun. So yeah, it is technically constant when the function is being run. It's not constant between runs. Okay, so we have this component. What it will render is, you know, piece of text. My name is blank, whatever you decide to give it. And then underneath there will be a button. It'll say, "I have been clicked 0 times." Okay, so let's talk about the life of this poor component. Sorry, my allergies are acting up today. But so we'll go through the life of Mr. Component over here. This is my famous patent pending story of explaining a React component. So the when you first kind of run the component, essentially Mr. Component here, he wakes up. He's like, oh, okay, what a beautiful day to exist within Hello World app, Hacktify Hello World app example 55. And before he starts his day, he's given some props. So he wakes up, oh, and God suddenly appears and above, and he whispers into his ear, "I have some holy words, some information to tell you before you start." And the prop is, since we have a name here, we're given some names. Like, so he kind of whispers, "Mr. Component, your name is Tony." So he's like, "Okay, cool. My name is Tony." So right, that's what we have here. Okay, yeah, my name is Tony. So he carries on, and we hit the score, which is use state. So the best way to describe that is, he goes over, he picks up a phone and he calls like use state, like, "Hey, use state, what's up? What's my count?" And use state tells him, "Well, you see, Tony, I've never talked to you my whole entire life, so I don't know why you're so familiar with me. But for new customers, if they ever call me, I was told that I would just give you the default value, which is 0. So your count is 0. And by the way, if you ever decide to change your count, here's my number. So this is the set count. The number so that you can call like use state back." And Tony's like, "Okay, cool. Well, I'll just carry on my way," and goes on with the rest of his day, his life. And he creates this wonderful, wonderful piece of like wonderful kind of set of elements for you to put on your website. Buonissimo. So at one point, someone comes along and goes like, "Oh, Tony, I'm just gonna push on your buttons." Quite literally, I'm gonna push on your button, and because you push on this button, according to this event handler, it says, okay, when Tony's button gets pressed, he's gonna set count to be 0 plus 1, which would be 1. So Tony's like, "Oh, how dare you push my button? I'm gonna let someone know, I'm gonna let HR know." So he picks up his phone and like dial in the number that he got from Ustate, and he calls him. It's like, "Hey, Ustate, I want my count to be 1 now." And Ustate's like, "Okay, cool, yeah, you're sure. I'll make sure to make your count 1." And as soon as he finished saying that, he pulls out a gun and shoots Tony. Bam, bam, and Tony's dead. And so then Tony's dead. He doesn't exist anymore. So and so you kind of re-render him, right? You call the function again. So start the whole function again. Yeah, you shoot Tony. So because we change the state, shoot Tony, and he's dead. Okay, so we need to recreate him. So we're gonna call this function again. Right. So he wakes up. Okay. I'm up again. Who am I? What am I? Huh? I'm Mr. Component. God comes down again, from the props, whispers in his ear, "Your name's still Tony, by the way." And he's like, "Okay, cool. My name's Tony." Goes back to the phone, calls Ustate. "Hey, Ustate, what's my count?" But this time, the answer is a little bit different. Ustate's like, "Wait a minute, Tony. I remember you. Before you had an accident, which was completely unrelated to me, you told me something. You told me that you want your account to be 1. So Tony's like, okay, cool, account's 1. All right. And you states like, awesome. And here's my number if you ever change your mind, by the way. Nothing's gonna happen. Don't worry about it. I got you. So the whole cycle repeats, right? Tony carries on his day, puts in good work, and gives you another nice, beautiful set of elements. But this time, the only difference is the text here says I've been clicked 1 time. And if you ever come around and press this button again, he's gonna call you again and say, okay, I want my count to be count plus 1, so 1 plus 1, 2. Gets shot again, gets remade, and the whole cycle repeats. So hopefully the story of Mr. Component has enlightened you all. Do you have any questions? All right, cool. I'll take that as good job. It's either that or the other 29 now. The other 29 people are confused. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about what React is at a high level and also just kind of in code in general. Now the next question, I guess, is how do you actually react? So first thing you have to do is get Node.js, which is basically just JavaScript in the server. And so it's JavaScript without things like sensors, because it's a server, and the window, because there is no window, right? It's just code. And to install it for Windows, you just go on the npm the Node website and just use the installer, or you can look up, or they might tell you to use a version manager, which I'm not too familiar with. For Mac and Linux, we have it a little bit better. So for Mac and Linux, I do not recommend you go on the Node website and install it. You install it through some kind of curl command. What I would recommend you do is actually use a version manager. So one being NVM. I think another one is FNM, which is like made in Rust. But NVM is pretty solid. I think it's fine. I don't think your computer would choke because it's not written in Rust. But yeah, you look up NVM. There will be like a GitHub for it, and you'll just follow the steps and install it. And the benefit of doing it that way is when you have to go about doing things like installing global dependencies, you don't have to actually use sudo, because if you install it with the curl command, it doesn't actually set up the permissions properly for you, which NVM does. And the other added benefit too is you can switch between Node versions. So if you have one app that's Node 12, one's 13, one's 14, there's no 13, one's 14, one's like 16, you could use the specific version. So after you get your whole environment set up, then you want to run this command. So what does this command do? So npx is a command from npm. And what it does is essentially whatever package you reference, it'll install it and just run it as if it's already installed. So you can think of it as just basically like a one-time use package. Create React app, that's the package made by Facebook to basically help people get started on React, because getting React to work, well, if you actually have to get it to work from like nothing but Node.js, it's a lot of pain and a lot more JavaScript and work that, I'll be honest, if you had to go through just so that you can use React, most people will probably not use React. So there you go. They have something that would do it for you. And then name would just basically create a folder by that name and make the name of the app that name. So after you run that command, the script will do its thing and create that folder, change so cd into that folder and do npm start. And after you do npm start, there you go. You have your first React app, and it will look like that. So, any questions so far? Which, if you're confused, don't worry. I'm going to do it together with you guys. Yeah, allergies. Okay. Well, don't worry. You could kind of catch up a little. I'll be going very slow. So I talked about how to get it set up. So, assuming you did this workshop and somehow this workshop has allowed you to transcend devhood, and now you're like a React god. How can you kind of go beyond? So, as the pools have told me, it seems like most people are not very strong with JavaScript. One thing that you should really do is, get to know JavaScript a bit more. Well, become a cat. Well, that's also pretty good too. Being a cat is pretty nice. You can sleep all day, and you get to like derp around and like do a little roll, and then your owners would just be like, "Oh my god, they're so cute," and rub your belly. But unfortunately, no. Not all of us can become cats. So yeah, what you can do is learn some JavaScript, because React is not a substitute for JavaScript. React is something that's built on top of JavaScript, so you can think of it as maybe almost like, it's like poetry. It's like doing poetry. Just because you're good at poetry doesn't mean that you're good at English or whatever language you're going to be doing poetry at. And you kind of have to know the language before you can apply the language. So, go learn some JavaScript, learn, about the things like different ECMA scripts versions, which if ECMA script if this is your very first time hearing the word ECMA script, it shows, you should probably, get to know the thing that you're probably, if you ever decide to pursue web development, the language that you'll be eat, sleep, and breathe in. Other thing too is, of course, to practice a lot, because JavaScript is a very finicky language. So if you haven't seen something called like the JavaScript Holy Trinity, it's a very funny meme where essentially you have like, what is it? And you have like a triangle, and it has like this is equal to this, and this is equal to this, but does not equal to this, and you have this like weird relationship where things could be equal but not equal depending on what is being compared to, because JavaScript is written by a literal madman in like 2 weeks. So yeah, practicing would help you a lot, because you will be able to learn things that logic cannot explain. And of course, last. So why is it the premiere? Because it works, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the best explanation I can give you. And of course, lastly, oh yeah, and it came first. It worked. People liked it. No, nobody bothered to change it, because changing it will require you to basically change how the internet works for billions and billions of people, and that is a bigger problem than JavaScript. So yeah, and then of course try going a little bit beyond Create React App. Create React App is great. It gets you started into React really fast and really easily. You don't actually have to deal with anything that is involved with getting React to React, because Facebook takes care of all of that for you. But that's not the end all of web development, right? There are like you should really take some time and appreciate the tools you use. So look a little bit more into the things that kind of power React and create React app in general. And knowing these things will put you in a really good spot to go a little bit more beyond. So some of these things will be like Webpack. Webpack is like the tool. It's the build tool that basically takes takes our spaghetti JavaScript code and turns it into even smaller spaghetti JavaScript code. We have Babel, which takes our JavaScript code that's written for like 2030 and put into JavaScript that will be in like, let's say, for like, I don't know, 2003, because for some reason you want this website to run on a computer in the museum. So that's what Babel does. It takes JavaScript from one version and writes into another. And of course, like I said, weird JavaScript like JSX and makes it into actual JavaScript. So all these fun tools. And I think that is it for these slides. So is there any questions about these slides before we go into a little bit of a code demo? I have enough time. Cool, I have plenty of time. Because I booked Prashant to give me more time because I know I never have enough time. Which is... Okay, no questions. Let's go into the little code demo. So right here we have a little environment ready for us. So first things first, we have to create our React app. So do what it just said, create npx create React app. And instead of putting in the name, I'm just going to put a dot because I already made the folder that I want to create this at. So I want it in here right now, not in another folder inside of the folder. I'll run that, sit here, twiddle my thumbs for a few minutes because this does take a little while. So how's everyone's projects going? Well, these are... I don't know what yes means, well, but it's a positive answer, so I would assume it's good. Yeah, maybe next year for Hack the Valley 6, I'm gonna get Prashant to give me a budget so that I can just give pushing dolls to people that show up. Like I'll just set up like random trivia questions and I'll just throw it at people. And here I am listening to people comment on my workshop. It's so low.com. Well, if you come to my other workshop, I will show you the other domain. I'll show you the domain that I bought for the demo. I feel like you guys will like this domain too. I think it's as worthy as low.com. Are you kidding when I said this takes a while? Because essentially what's happening is you're installing an npm package that will run to install more npm packages, and that process takes. Oh, okay. Well, there. Nope. Still going. Yeah, but yeah. So essentially, what this is doing, you're installing a CLI that would create a boilerplate that will install more dependencies, and when it installs those dependencies, it also has to. Well, it's hard to explain. Like basically, what's happening is this is a package that creates an app that installs packages for you. So because of this weird, long chain of things that are happening, this takes a while. If you're actually, using it, it's not that bad. Yeah, you don't have to refresh app. It's reacting. It's alive. That doesn't look good. It is what it is. Anyways. So here are some of the main things that they will give you. So npm starts your server, build your code, test. Let's be honest, nobody's going to use that. And eject, which I pray to God you never use, because what eject does is it actually, well, it mentions it right there, copies all of the build dependencies and stuff that makes it run and kind of pulls it out of React scripts. So basically, long story short, React's not going to look after your project anymore. So if something breaks in the Webpack or the Babel, you're on your own, because you're you basically eject it. So don't do that if you ever want to, if you're using React app. If you ever do, but if you're ever curious about how it works, I personally have rejected multiple projects just so that I could, look at it and check out the Webpack, which would take you a few days. So, anyways, our stuff here is done. People have complained about complaining about this being too small before, so here it is, much bigger, much bigger. So here we have a few things. We have our node modules. These are all of your npm packages. Do not push that. You don't need to push that. Sometimes they're specific to your computer and only your computer, and also they could be as big as several hundred megabytes, and nobody wants to sit there and watch their git push take 5 minutes. So don't push it. Make sure you put your git ignore and put that there. We have our public folder. So our public folder is very similar to basically like a static folder in the server. So these are basically files that if it's in there, it doesn't change. It'll just be copied into the root of your website. This is a static file. And then source here is basically just kind of your main app. So this is basically where all of your React code will go and exist. I have a few things here, your CSS, your JS, your test. If this looks weird, don't be afraid. This is essentially just Jest, which is Facebook's testing framework for JavaScript, which is actually pretty amazing. And yeah. And we have this report web vitals. This is relatively new to me too, but it's essentially just like little hooks that would attach to Lighthouse so they can give you better metrics. And setup test is just testing stuff. Okay. So essentially we can ignore this. Well, we can ignore this. Well, we can ignore that because that's just that and that. So let's look at our index.js. This is essentially the root of, actually, no, before that, let's look at the HTML. So inside of our HTML, this is kind of what it looks like. So back to what I think one of the questions, so asked, which I actually didn't really mention too much, but React is client side. So what happens is when you request a page, you actually get nothing but the same HTML, no matter what page you go to. So this is for like some what is commonly made called a single page app. So regardless of what page you try to access on a website, you're always given the same HTML, which is this one that we're looking at right now. And inside this HTML, the only thing that's in it is this body and this div and this no script. And of course, like a few script tags here. So what happens is as this empty HTML website gets sent to you on the browser, and when it loads, it runs the JavaScript, and then that JavaScript, which is the React code itself, would then build it instantaneously. So instead of your typical kind of like I guess server side rendered, which is website, request the page, server builds the HTML, gives you the full HTML page, that's it. We get empty page, builds when it gets to you. So kind of like IKEA, actually, if you think about it. You get the pieces, you don't get the actual furniture. And from there, it gets mounted here. So remember this ID root. So right here we have the root of our actual JavaScript code or actual like React stuff. And we import a bunch of these things. So this is basically our first component. Whether or not you want to have this or just put the JavaScript write all your code in here is completely up to you. But it's better to just put it here because it's just kind of out of the way. And from there we call this stuff. You could actually ignore these two things. They're irrelevant. You could just assume that it doesn't exist. But just to keep things simple. But right here we have React DOM.render, React script mode, app, and this thing. So if you remember, so before I start here, let's start at the top. We have React and React DOM. So what are the differences? React is the JavaScript that would create your elements. So that's like the rendering code. React DOM is a JavaScript that would actually take all of your rendered stuff and put it onto the website itself. So it's the thing that connects your React, so your JavaScript, like JavaScript rendered stuff, and puts it on the website itself. Okay. So is that clear? React, stuff that's for rendering. React DOM, the bit that sits between the HTML and the JavaScript and basically takes that and sticks it in. So, we're rendering this stuff. So we're rendering all these components into the website, and we're going to put it into here, which if we go back to here, this div, so we're going to stick all of whatever we want made into this div. And React strict mode is basically just similar to JavaScript script mode. It's React, but with rules that you should follow, and if you don't follow, they would basically throw an error at you. So that's done. We have our app. It's this simple function. It says, okay, just render the stuff. That's it. So let's take a look at what it looks like. And actually, I will be back in a second. I'm gonna go grab something. So, wrong button. So yeah, allergies, not fun. Yes, excellent question. So what extension do I have? Depends. I actually have multiple profiles. It depends on the profile. I'll use a different thing. That's running. It is running. No, it's actually not because of compression. It is actually glowing. So yeah, when you run your React app, this will pop up. It'll open a new tab for you. But yeah, it's not because of compression. So I'll just work down the list. And yeah, it also runs on your network too. So if you have a phone connected to the same Wi-Fi, you can see your website. So some extensions I have. I have like, actually I can show you right here. I have a bunch of themes. I have a Dart, something for Dart because I played around with some Flutter. This one, better comments. So, that basically lets you do stuff like, if I put a comment here, I can do annotations. So I can put like exclamation mark, turns red. Ooh. Put a question mark, turns blue. Ooh. Put to do, turns orange. Ooh. So that's what that's for. Dart, Docker. I'll be honest, I don't need this anymore, but I'll just keep it. Flutter, blah, blah, blah. GitLens, very good. Basically, lets you kind of highlight over something and it tells you who changed what line at what time. Really good for finding out why things are broken and blaming yourself because you're the one who wrote it 2 years ago. And yeah, to-do tree just shows you all the to-dos you have. And yeah, I think that's kind of it for on this thing. I'm not going to mention it. It's kind of garbage. But those are kind of things I have. So glow and text. So the glow and text is part of a theme. It's part of this one, the synthwave. So see, makes it glow. Ooh, neon lights. I was cool and made my thing look like cyberpunk before cyberpunk was a real thing. I had everyone's kind of going like, ooh, ray tracing in a game. Well, I've been ray tracing in my IDE. So so yeah. And of course a bunch of this theme stuff. So like these icons, very nice icons. So yeah, how you get the theme? Just download it under extensions. Just search it up. It's in fact, I think if you just search up like theme, it's like one of the first things that pop up. Oh, not anymore. But yeah, I will throw it in here because I think someone's crazy enough to go like several hours with this theme because their eyes are basically it's either their eyes are indestructible or their vision is so bad that it doesn't make a difference anymore. Okay, so that's all. The stuff's all run. And go back here. Here we are, our first React app, with a spinny thing. So the thing that's great about this is it tells you when things are wrong. So compared to traditional kind of web development with, more or less notepad, just slapping away, is, I can make a super silly mistake. And it will tell me that you've made a silly mistake. This is going to break rather than rendering something that looks like complete gibberish. And if you're the type of person who's like, IDE, what's that? I mean, terminal, what's that? I don't want to look at that. How dare you tell me what to do? It puts it on the website for you so that you have no choice but to respond to it. So it's for the better good. So yeah, you do that. I do changes, I put ooh. I don't have to refresh the website. It hot reloads it for me. So that's a React hot reloader for you. So, oh, that's cool. I don't think you guys are here to just watch me talk about that. So let's go a little bit more into what is the main goal of this um, code demo, so that I don't waste 30 minutes talking about useless stuff. And that would be hooks. So there are a few hooks that you would be using from React, the most common ones, I would say. And that would be use state, use effect, and I would argue maybe use reducer, but it's not too important. In fact, I think maybe actually instead of that, let's go into React. Well, not that. Let's go into React website and we'll go through all the hooks together a little bit. Hooks at a glance. Hooks API. There we go. So, oh yeah, context is pretty basic. We'll talk about that. That's for something different though. I think that's a more advanced topic. But we have a use state, we have a use effect, which I will go over a little. We have our use reducer. So what use reducer is if you have, let's say, something that requires a lot of state change. So let's say you had an object and it has multiple, fields in it, and a single state change requires you to change like n number of fields. Rather than have like a bunch of use state, you can have a use reducer that would do all those changes for you. Another use case for use reducer is if you want to basically have a set of changes that happen based on a kind of predetermined thing that you want to. So let's say you have add account. On add account, I want to put this thing into an array, and I want to change account over here, and I want to, reference it here, here, here. All these like complicated changes, and you don't want that inline somewhere. You can have a use reducer where you can just do something like, dispatch create user, and this is like a little custom tag you make yourself, and which you call create user. Give it to user. You kind of do that like behind the scenes. We have use callback, use memo, use ref. So these are just basically memorization stuff. So it's just kind of storing things, and it does play a key role, which I will talk a little bit about. So we'll talk a little bit about use callback. I'll be honest, I don't know what this is. I've never used it in my whole entire life. This one probably haven't used it too much. And we have use layout effect, which is just a use effect, but at a different point of the life cycle with different characteristics. But I wouldn't go over that either because 99.99% of the time you're using use effect and you don't need to use the other one. So yeah, let's but that aside. Oh, and use context. So context is just basically the TLDR is if you have a component that has a component that has a component that has a component. So you have like this giant like 20 layer deep like nestedness, and you want to pass a prop from the top component to the last one, rather than going like passing it one by one by one by one manually. You can create a context and basically skip all of that. But like I said, that's more complex, so I'm not going to go over that. So in here, let's talk about these two. And let's create thing that we saw before, count. The use count thing. Bada bam. There we go. And of course, we have to add in a event handler. So on click, you might see these two on click capture. So since most of the stuff don't know JavaScript, I'll explain that. It is basically just at a different point of event capturing, because in JavaScript, when you do events, there is a concept called bubbling down and bubbling up. So when you press a button, what happens is this click propagates down. So it goes from, the HTML to the body to the, to the div and maybe another div or whatever, and whatever parents above to get to the button. And then from there, it goes back up. So on click, I believe it's the way down, and on click capture is the way up, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know, but that's what it is. Back to what I said before, I guess. Maybe not 99.99, but 80% of the time, actually, safe to say 90% of the time, it's probably on click. So on click, give it a function, set count to be count plus 1. And you can see here, click, it says 1. Click again, 2. Click again, 3. Ooh. And kind of back to what I've mentioned before, where I said, a component is essentially a function, right? Every time something changes, it just kind of gets re-rendered, gets rebuilt. So, back to my analogy, right? Remember I said, when you call set state, I shoot the component, I kill it, and then I rerun it. So I can prove that. So I can put a console log here and say, I have been revived, right? So, clear this, refresh this, give it a hard refresh so you can see, okay, I've been revived. If I click it, you can see I've been revived and called again. So this function is being recalled every time I change state. And that's basically what re-rendering looks like. It's just calling the function and it's getting this JSX. So this is kind of what use state is. It keeps track of state of something, and yeah, it just keeps it there as long as it's mounted. So what that means by mounted means that when I re-render, it stays on the page. And if it doesn't stay on the page, it's not rendered. It's unmounted. So I talked about the use state. So const is just a variable that you will not change. So you can't reassign the variable, essentially. It could be a let. Like, I can make this a let. God forbid 4. Don't use 4. I don't care. I don't care what you have to say. I don't care if it's like Fred, but my great grandfather's dying wish was for me to use 4. I don't care. Use let. Don't use 4. War is like wrong in so many ways, shape, and form that I don't even want to get into. And just trust me, Uncle Fred, and to tell you, don't use more. Just use let if you really have to. But back to, I guess, const and let. Is there a difference? Not really. Would I notice a difference? Probably not. But it's just good practice, because the only real difference it really makes is how the JavaScript engine compiles your JavaScript. But modern computers are so strong that it doesn't matter. The other question is, why does it look like two variables? Good question. So I could have easily did this, I guess. So essentially what I did is I basically did something that looks like this. Does this look a little bit more familiar, Ethan? I will take your silence as yes. So yeah, useState is just returning an array with two elements. Rather than doing this, I could do this. Because in JavaScript we have a thing. So I know it's not an operator, but and yeah, I could use setCount as a function. So JavaScript, that's also one of the weird things about JavaScript, where you could create functions and you can store it essentially, and you can pass functions around like a variable. But this syntax where I take the array and I kind of break it up and make it into its own variable, that's called a deconstructing operator. So I basically just kind of deconstruct it. It's not like you write anything, but there's some. I don't know. I'm not even gonna answer. I might be biased because I basically I'm the in the pool. If I were to answer it, I would eat, sleep, and breathe JavaScript. Like if I participated in that like code in the dark, like I will basically write you a whole entire website blindly, and I wouldn't have a problem. So how does Pro know what set state does? I mean set count does, and you just use set count. So what was the best way to explain it? Like it knows because it just passes the function like almost as a reference. So like if you've ever done any C, it's just like passing things by reference. It's passing a function as a reference. It's just that most programming languages, they are not as, I guess, like they're not as flexible as JavaScript in the sense that you could literally take a reference of a function, put it in a box and just like walk away with it. Like there's usually some kind of really weird syntax or some kind of weird like step in between before you can do that. Like for example, like for example, like for C you could pass function around too, but you have to use a very weird syntax. And also the rules about it is that you had to make them beforehand compared to JavaScript where I could literally let me mute something real quick. So like compared to JavaScript where like I could make a function out of the blue and store it and just like throw it around freely. Oh, where is it defined? It's defined here. So it's just defined by the useState. useState will always return you an array where the first thing is the value and the second thing is the thing to change value. So that's just how it works, like the hook itself works. And we don't have to care it, and we don't have to worry about it because React is declarative. And if you really, really want to know, I could give you a high level answer, but I don't think most people will care. But yeah, thank you, Ramit. I hope I didn't butcher your name. Okay, so we talked about useState. So let's talk a little bit about useEffect. So useEffect is a very, very peculiar hook. In fact, it's probably one of the hardest ones to learn. So I guess for people who are like a little bit more like deeper into their CS uni, they they will understand what I'm about to say. If you're like first or second year, you might not know what I'm saying because you might not have learned these words before, but essentially use effect is a side effect. So a side effect is basically something that is not part of kind of the main flow. So remember how like much earlier into this workshop I mentioned a term called a pure component, where if I do one thing, something else happens. Like if I put in one thing, I get like if I put in A, I get B. And doesn't matter how many times I run this function, if I put in A, I'm getting B. So use effect is kind of like if I well, actually no, but actually pure functions don't have anything to do with it. My bad. But essentially, it's kind of like when I run this function, put in A, get B, put in A, get B. Consequently, because I put in A, I get B. There's a random byproduct that just kind of shoots out of like I don't know, like the middle of this function, which is like out of the blue, like D comes over there. It goes like, "What's up?" So that's like a side effect. It's like some kind of random weird residue that comes out. So, and this use effect, uh, depending on what you do here, which I'll explain what it is too, but depending on what you do here, it would change how it behaves. So right now, if I have this empties, and this is called like these are called the dependencies of this effect. It would essentially act as a on mount and on unmount. And what an on mount and on unmount means is when this element this component on the DOM gets removed, it's unmount, and when it gets like put in, it's called mount, and it has to be physically moved and like put in and taken out. So a re-render is not the same thing as a mount and unmount. So it has physically disappeared from the DOM for it to be considered a mount and unmount. And if I change whatever goes in here, so let's say, so actually let me show you. So if I do I've been born. There's a been five. From here, clear this, press this. I've been revived, and then I've been born. So notice this comes after revive because use effect is actually does happen after a little bit. If I press this multiple times, you see, this has been changed multiple times, right? This function has been recalled multiple times, but this born has only been called once. Okay, that's the difference between mount and re-render. Re-render, I would change what it looks like. I'm doing changes. Mount and unmount means like I would not see this button anymore and we could emulate that a little too. So let's go. Actually, this is a bad place to do it, but you'll just have to trust my word, okay? Just believe in me. So the other thing we could do too is, okay, I could actually add stuff here. So one thing I can add is I could add in count. And you have to be very careful actually on what you put in here. So remember, this is a function. So all of the things you learn from possibly first year computer science about, if you're taking Python, which how they say, remember kids, if you make something inside of a function and a function is finished being called, all the things associated to it in memory is unassociated. that is a very important thing for this use effect, because if I were to create, let's say, an object in here, and I put this as a dependency, which I'm not going to save because I know what's going to happen, this thing will actually cause an infinite loop. Okay, like this use effect will always happen. And what I mean by infinite loop is a lot of times these set counts, you could have something like, let's say we could do right. A lot of times this is what a use effect would look like, right? You would have like that, and then it's like, okay, I've been born. Okay, watch this count. If count set as count to be true, right? You know, yeah. So it gets recreated every single time because, you know, as I call this function, you know, I'm making this new object because this function is being called. And when this use effect goes to check on this dependency, because check on this dependency, the object that gets passed in here is a different object compared to the object from the previous function, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Anyone, you know, not very familiar with memory models? It wants me to go a little bit like deeper. But yeah, like it's not the same thing, essentially. And because of that, this will basically constantly run. It will always do set true, set true, set true, set true. And you have to get infinite loop, and your browser freezes and you will cry. So yeah, don't do this. You have to be careful what you put in here. For something that's a little bit more scalar, like a number or a string, that's okay. But once you start doing like objects and functions, more complicated objects, you'll run into that problem. But yeah, back to this count. So this use effect I can do, you know, console.log my count is let's count. Fact, rather than do this, use fancy syntax because I know how much you guys love my fancy syntax, or maybe not because I'm confusing you guys. We can do this backticks and basically do a string interpolation. So now, because I added a dependency, this no longer behaves as an on mount and on unmount. This now behaves like a did update or on update kind of. Now it behaves as every time this count changes, we will call something here. Like we will run this function here. So let's see that. Let me clear that. All right. I have 5, my count is 0. All right, press that. I have 5, my count is 1. Right? So you know, back to what I kind of said, the side effect, so it's use effect. So the side effect of the count changing is now going to be the fact that this console log has happened. So one thing you that a lot of people you could do with these use effect is you could maybe set up like a little loop, right? So let's try that. We can do every 2 seconds. Tell me what my count is. Let's try that. I'm gonna take that out. Don't take that. Run this. See here, my count is okay. They ignored. Oh, okay, let's clear it out for now. Don't worry. They gave it away. So you see here, every 2 seconds it says my count 0, my count 0, my count 0. But notice what happens when I update the count. That's weird. I'm still saying 0, still saying 1. Okay, you know, that's very weird. I don't want that. You know, if I change that to 3, it shouldn't be telling me my count 0. It's not 0 anymore. It should be 3. So what React has done for us is they actually created something that you can do to basically clean up before this use effect gets called again. And the way you do it is in here you return a function. So when your count changes, it's able to do a set of actions, which in our case we can do something like this. We can do we'll get this timer ID, and in here we'll get rid of the timer. Okay, we'll get rid of the timer when the count changes. Now, if we go back to here, it says 0. Actually, I'm going to increase that speed of just a little bit more. It's like 0, 0, 0, 0. I press this. Now it's 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. And that's a little bit more expected. So hopefully, did that make any sense? The old use effect, it's not that the use old effect is alive. It's more about the fact that when we make this timer, we basically didn't stop it, right? We like start the timer, and then it's kind of like, you know, you're boiling a pot of water, and before you leave the room, you didn't turn off the stove, you just left it on. So what we have to do is basically, if we're gonna leave the room, we gotta turn off the stove, right? So that's what we do. We could basically return a function, and the function is just gonna be things that we're gonna do before we leave, and you know that would be things like turning off the stove, and then you know we'll come back and turn it on when we're back. So yeah. With that, I think, well, I'm out of time too. So with that, I think we're basically done with this workshop. Hopefully, it's been very informative. Does anyone here have any questions? Like any last minute questions? I'll wrap them up before I let you guys go. As always, I will take silence as nothing. Okay. So if there are no more questions, oh, okay, no problem. I'm glad you liked it. These front-end frameworks are always very fun. There's a lot of things you can always go a little bit deeper on. But yeah, if there's nothing else, you know, you guys are free to go. You know, class is dismissed. Hopefully, you guys are wiser and you know not dumber because of because of the trauma I've put you through. Do I have a day theme? For my ID, no, but everything else I have it just changed depending on the time of day. Because Mac does that. It's cool. But yeah, if there's nothing else, you know, you guys are free to go. I'll just go around the actually, I don't know. But Sean, what do? Do I just leave? I'm not trained for this. I'm also not paid enough to know this. In fact, I don't think I'm paid at all. Oh, he's not even here. Oof. Okay, well, guess that's it. Thank you everyone for coming. I guess I'll just leave. Yep.